In Mali's capital city, Bamako, everywhere you look at the moment, there are election posters. A statue in the heart of the city has become a symbol of the return of democracy here, almost 2 years since a coup that brought the country to the brink of collapse. Britain's military advice and support seems to have helped this country recover at a speed which has surprised the British ambassador here.
We had 2/3 of the country under Islamist control. Most of the north was occupied by a mixture of terrorists and Azawadi nationalists. We had a transitional government being controlled from the shadows by the military leaders of the coup. Well, within a year, the north has been taken back. Most of the Islamists have been killed or driven out of the country. There are still some pockets left, but by and large they've gone. The EU training mission has started. There's been presidential election.
This really is a busy and functioning capital city, and there is no real hint here of the tension of what might have been just a few months ago. And that stability is to be found across much of the south, but as yet that stability does not exist in the north of Mali.
We've gone through a period of stability, I would say, of about 3 months in the north of Mali particularly, which is now becoming a little bit more unstable as the government is trying to find its feet. We've got local elections taking place this month, and that is causing some instability. Various organisations are trying to make their mark in the north of Mali in particular.
Mali's army seems to be back on top of the threats within its own country, but it is still doing that with the help of soldiers from France and neighbouring nations. Britain's not involved in the fighting. Instead, it's one of 20 nations trying to turn Mali's army into one that can support itself.
At the beginning of our intervention, it was an army which had been beaten militarily and conquered on the ground, who had been humiliated following the offensive by the jihadist armed groups and the armed terrorist groups. It was an army which had been profoundly destructured, which had lost its confidence in itself, which had lost a part of the confidence of the population.
Mali's leaders seem to recognise the scale of the difficulties their forces faced. That's why they asked Europe not only to train up, but also help rebuild their army.
There's fairly major issues over logistics. The infrastructure is old and not fit for purpose. There's a shortage of trained personnel, and there is a crippling shortage of spares. And these are all things that the Malian forces need to address, and we're helping them to do so.
The EU training mission in Kulukuru, around 40 miles from Bamako, has taken over half the sites used by Mali's equivalent of Sandhurst. In a year, it will train up 4 battalions, a mix of improving serving soldiers and bringing new soldiers into service. Britain's contribution to this mission at the moment, 21 trainers from 1st Battalion, the Rifles. They're working with 6 members of the Irish Defence Force and also 6 French soldiers to train a Malian company of around 150 soldiers.
For me anyway, we'll see, but it's been really useful for all the people that have been through it. They've been able to acquire a certain knowledge they'd have never have picked up anywhere else on the rest of the training system or on their bases. Actually, it's also been helpful for commanding a unit. We've been able to take on lots of knowledge regarding how to give orders at unit level.
2 battalions have already completed the EU-led training and started work in the north of Mali. By next spring, 2 more should have joined them. But EU politicians must decide soon if they're prepared to commit to another year's training so that those battalions can be relieved. James Hurst, Forces News, Mali.